I began my career in illustration doing work for the New York Times, and surprisingly I did these as wood engravings. I later transitioned over to scratchboard, but initially I worked entirely in wood engravings, and so it was an interesting process, and one that was very popular at the time. So I gradually evolved my wood engraving into woodcut, and the process evolved over time into color illustration. So from color illustration, I started doing color woodcuts in landscape. So all of my painting evolves out of the process of relief printing. Now, I was interested to note that Van Gogh was very intrigued with woodcut, especially the woodcut of the Japanese. And he studied woodcut quite a bit. It's not surprising that Van Gogh's work has that sort of energy and rhythm that's typical of a woodcut or a wood engraving. So as I transitioned from wood engraving to woodcut and then to painting, I discovered that my strokes were similar, that I laid down the color in a similar fashion. Both woodcuts and the type of painting that I do use knives, but in my painting I use palette knives, and it has a metaphorical similarity, and I like to think of my paintings in the similar fashion, that I'm sort of carving the paint, and there's a sculptural quality to the way I use both the engraving tool and the V-gouges of woodcut, and the way I use my palette knives when I paint. And I do think of it sort of as a three-dimensional form. The block, obviously you can see here, it is three-dimensional. I mean, there's a dimensionality to the cuts. As I paint, I think of it in a similar fashion, and that was really the key to synthesizing these two art forms for me. And it really was the point where I grasped onto a very distinctive style when I started to think about these two forms in a similar fashion. Later, I started doing acrylic marker paintings underneath my paintings. Now this case here that you're seeing is a piece that I left as is. I never painted over the top of this. But in many cases, I actually do what looks like a woodcut underneath a 3x3 or a 4x4 painting, or however the size is. And I use the underpainting as a guide for the strokes. And you might say it's a rehearsal for the final painting. So each stroke is an indication of where I may put down the color stroke, the slash of paint. The precise underpainting also allows me to delineate exactly where each color mass goes, so that helps me quite a bit. What I'm trying to do is fuse two aspects of my art together. You might say I'm fusing the intellectual aspects of the wood engraving and woodcut process with the very emotional process of impressionist landscape painting, where I add the color very spontaneously. I use a lot of broken color. That is, I use a lot of color that has mixture in each stroke. In other words, each stroke has 3 or 4 different colors, possibly, at least 2. And that gives a vibrational effect that is, I find, extremely powerful.